thanks very much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing great, Ben. Good morning to you.
Brilliant. Well, Nick, obviously it's good to have you on as sort of a leader in the E&P industry and sort of as the CEO of one of the largest natural gas producers in the US. I think it provides an interesting alternative perspective to the investors we normally have on this series. So I guess maybe to start things off, I would just put the question to you, with Europe planning to reduce its reliance on Russian gas imports, as we know, following the unfortunate developments between Russia and Ukraine, and with the Biden administration having recently signed an LNG supply agreement with the European market. I just wanted to get your take on how well equipped is the US oil and gas industry and US natural gas producers to meet this demand?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we talk about quite a bit right now. So the producer community is totally equipped. We have the resources, we have the ability, we have the capacity to grow production and grow production materially. But what we don't have in the U.S. is the infrastructure to deliver that to the markets where it's needed. And so we really don't have a connected supply chain that can be effective immediately to the immediate need that we see in Russia, that we see in Ukraine as a result of the Russian invasion, and so therefore what we see all over Europe. So as we think about the U.S. and Europe agreeing that an incremental 15 billion cubic meters of gas to be delivered in the short term and 50 BCM over time, that's a pretty significant amount of incremental LNG. There is a lot of LNG that's under construction, LNG export capacity that's under construction in the US today, but the timeline for that will be somewhat extended. It will be another 5+ years before quite a bit of that incremental capacity is online. So there's still going to be a challenge to deliver enough energy to Europe for several years. And I think that how Europe handles that challenge is one of the key geopolitical questions that we all should be paying very close attention to.
No, absolutely. And so building on that, I think a conversation we have been having with many partners across our network over the past couple of years is around this rhetoric of the past 2 years and how it's generally revolved around the need for structural change within the E&P industry, particularly the US shale industry, and how shareholders have been putting significant pressure on management teams to maintain capital discipline, prioritize cash flow over production growth, et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond as a natural gas producer under these, or a public natural gas producer under these pressures, to respond to the demand to increase oil and gas production in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? How does the industry meet the rising demand whilst ensuring that it doesn't make the same mistakes that it made in the past?
Well, I think it comes right back to the point we talked about in the first question, which is how do we think about having the infrastructure ability to deliver production to the markets where it's needed? I mean, take, for example, the Northeast US today. We produce a very large amount of gas in Pennsylvania. We own a tremendous amount more resources. We have lack of pipeline capacity to deliver gas to New England. New England, therefore, has to import gas. Gas costs in New England are extremely high. We just completed an acquisition of Chief in Pennsylvania, and so our production there is now very significant. We're the largest producer in Northeast PA, and we would like to be in a position where we could deliver more gas to markets that need it. And when we talk about investor pressure around what growth should or shouldn't look like, it's really making sure that producers have an ability to deliver supply that matches demand. And so without incremental infrastructure, then there really is no demand that we can actually deliver to. If we had incremental infrastructure in the form of new pipelines to New England, and you could have clarity on what demand was needed there, and then the industry could respond appropriately with a leveled growth into that demand, I think that's something that shareholders would ultimately support. The reason that there's so much rhetoric saying producers will not grow today is because there is not that visibility. And so I think just as rational economic entities, we don't want to grow supply in a way that does not deliver that supply where it's needed.
No, absolutely. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And just so we're mindful of time, so another question that I'd put to you, which I've been asking quite a lot of partners across our network, is around this question of the energy transition and actually what this does for that. I mean, obviously, we know that natural gas has a huge role to play in the energy transition, being a low carbon fuel, etc. I mean, does this provide an opportunity to accelerate the decarbonisation of the energy supply chain? And US natural gas producers like yourselves at Chesapeake have been placing huge emphasis, for example, on independent third-party certification of natural gas production as you respond to pressures to reduce carbon and methane emissions. Arguably, US natural gas producers are paying far more attention to this than your Russian counterparts, and the data is proof of that. I mean, how do you see this?
I think you're spot on with this. So there's really three primary considerations that energy policymakers should always consider, right? It's reliability, which today takes on another term of energy security, but it's really a similar concept. It's affordability and it's climate concerns. And if you really think about the right balance for all three of those things, you land on natural gas without question as a huge component of what the energy supply stack should be if we're going to be efficient in how we deliver energy to all of the citizens of the world in a way that meets all three of those goals. Natural gas has a very low carbon footprint, and if we used considerably more natural gas and offset coal, offset other forms of energy, of electricity generation, you would see a significant reduction in methane emissions as well as in CO2. Now, if in addition to that, we used more production out of the US relative to places like Russia or other places around the world that do not have the same kind of accountability, the same kind of controls, then you're right. The data does prove out that emissions would be reduced further. So we have an opportunity, we believe, to be truly accretive to the world's goals around all three of those key features of what energy policy should be: reliability, affordability, climate concerns. The accountability, the regulatory structure in the US is powerful, and we believe in meeting those responsibilities very strongly, and you can see that in the track record that our industry has. You also see that our industry is very front-footed with goals going forward about how to reduce our emissions footprint even further. And so we know that we can deliver a great answer to the world's energy supply stack and meet all three of those. We need the right engagement. We need the right partnering with policymakers. And frankly, the U.S. has never really had an energy policy. We've always talked about wanting to become independent. We now have achieved that independence, and we probably need an energy policy today more than we ever have.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. And I think just to round it off, developing on that ESG theme and that ESG topic, moving away from the environmental piece and perhaps more towards the social piece, with the developments in Russia and Ukraine, I think there's a perception more widely that perhaps it's the socially responsible thing to do now to be investing in increasing oil and gas production and investing in upstream again as you reduce reliance, as I say, on those Russian oil and gas supplies. I mean, from your perspective, is it becoming fashionable again to invest in oil and gas? Are we seeing perhaps some investors who had been sitting on the fence or leaving the space starting to come back?
No, I think we are. We're having a lot of engagement, particularly from European investors, which makes a lot of sense. We're having engagement from some US-based investors that have been absent from oil and gas in general, but natural gas for a while. And we're having a lot of engagement there. But I will say that, John Kerry over the weekend saying that there's, a maximum of a 10-year life left for natural gas assets in his view. I mean, that's just not helpful. And it's not rational. It's not constructive. And it's completely ignoring what I think your question started with, which is the social elements of how we need to deliver energy that meets the world's needs. We cannot leave people without adequate supply of energy. And a policy which says that we should have 10 years left for natural gas is completely counter to that and will be destructive in the way of meeting the social needs of the world, and particularly in the short term, Europe.
No, absolutely. I think it makes perfect sense. Thanks, Nick. And I mean, that's all for today, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights and your views. We're obviously having Morgan come and join us at the New York Stock Exchange next month, so very much looking forward to continuing some of these conversations with her there. But thanks, Nick, for joining us today, and we'll catch up soon.
All right. Thanks, Ben.